one example, your favourite example of memory of one of your working dogs in the police force. If you can, I don't know if
no. I've got so many. Yeah.
One example. Hopefully, if it has anything to do with what you've been talking about as well, even better. But otherwise,
I had a dog called Cap, and Cap was a German Shepherd. He was in the latter stages of his police career. He was 7.
How long? 7. So they start at what, 2? Or
we would normally start training them when they were about 1, and they would retire at about 8. So you've got about 7 working years if you're lucky. A bit less normally. And for police dogs, it's physically very arduous. Not only the work, but the training is very demanding. And you don't want to push a dog beyond its physical capabilities. So hopefully, when they start getting a bit older and stiff and slowing up, they would be retired. But Cap had 2 previous handlers. I was his 3rd handler. So he taught me more about police dogs probably than anybody else could have done, because he just did it. And I was able to learn from reading what he did and become a better dog handler, I have to say, and probably a better dog trainer. I had this dog, and he was a dog that, unusually for my dogs, I could take him into a kid's primary school and he could meet the kids. I used to take him to therapy sessions.
Unusually, would you say normally they're not?
Not many of the dogs I had I would have taken into a primary school and let kids pet them for sure. But he had a very reliable on and off switch. And so he would go into school and let kids stroke him, and I used to take him into hospitals and physiotherapy groups, and they would fuss him, and he was great. He could switch from that. You could take him into a violent crowd of people, and he was like an alligator. He would just chomp his way through the crowd until people cleared out the way. But on this particular day, we had been training and we were on our way back home, and there was a call in regarding a car that had been involved in a whole series of burglaries and robberies way away from where I was. And I was just making my way home, listening to this happening, and I heard the registration of the car. I was just going down the dual carriageway when this car came past me at high speed. I recognised the number. They obviously realised that they'd just burnt up a marked police car, and they put their foot down, left the dual carriageway onto a small road. Long and the short of it was, as I tried to follow them, they were out of sight. They were gone. And I just used a bit of experience to think, well, what would they do? And a member of the public...
There's more than one of them.
I didn't... it turned out that there were 4.
Wow.
But I didn't know. At that time, I hadn't... because it was so... The crimes were some distance away from me, I hadn't really been involved in it. It wasn't... it wasn't my... I'd finished work for the day, basically. Anyhow, I set off after it, called up that I'd seen the vehicle, I'd lost it, and that I was looking for it. And a member of the public had obviously seen this car take a little rural country lane, and I went down this lane, and they'd got to the end, and when I got there, the doors were open, and nobody there. No sign of them. No sign of anybody, but you could still hear the engine pinging. It was so hot, and the brakes were so hot you could hear them, the noise of these brakes, red hot brakes pinging.
It's like the fire in the background. That's what George was saying.
A bit as warm as this fire. Anyhow, so I got the dog out, put him on his tracking harness and line, called up, told the local police control where I was and that I'd got a track away from this vehicle. And we started tracking. Now, you've got to trust your dog. The thing about all these things is you learn to trust the dog. And nobody told me where they'd gone.
This is across fields, though.
It was in a rural environment. They'd come out of a town. They'd decided to take evasive action down into a rural environment and got stuck. It was a no through road, and they'd just gone as far as they could and dumped it and run. And presumably they would have been looking for another car to steal. But I didn't know that. And I didn't know how many people. I just knew there was more than one as they went past me at about 100 miles an hour. So you don't get to see too much.
No,
The dog started tracking, and we quickly got onto a field where we were tracking that was freshly cultivated. It was an agricultural field. It was freshly cultivated, and I could see a lot of footprints. So I knew I was tracking more than one person.
Yeah.
It was very near to the police air support base, which is at Kidlington in Oxfordshire. Very close, actually. So I asked for the helicopter to deploy to see whether or not they could spot these offenders, because whilst they might not be able to do any more than guide other officers in, one of the biggest benefits as a dog handler is that it tends to cause people to slow down and hide.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And if you're tracking people and they are running, you have got to be going faster than them if you're ever going to catch them, or they've got to stop.
Yeah.
And the benefit of having other officers around is that you can try and slow them down or get them to take cover and hide from you to give you a chance of catching up, because it can go on for a long time, and this track did. And the dog tracked across the first field. I knew we were onto them, so I was pretty confident to go with this track, and it wasn't just some walker that had gone down this footpath. So off we went. The other thing you've got to appreciate is that most criminals do not go out carrying about 2 stone in body armour, police radios, handcuffs, batons, CS, and all the other things that we carry. So you are already disadvantaged by the physical weight of everything you're carrying and trying to catch up with some youthful
and a freshly cultivated field which is going to stick to your feet.
Yeah. So it's hard work, but we'd trained for it. I was pretty fit in those days, and we tracked across the first field. We got to the boundary fence of a railway line. They'd obviously seen, I presume, all the films and thought, well, they'll throw off the police dogs. So they got onto the railway line, went up the railway line. In this day and age, I suspect somebody in the health and safety department would stop me, but we carried on tracking because you're not allowed to go on railway lines without the trains being put on stop.
Right.
But, you have to be sensible. Anyhow, the dog was tracking, and off we went up the railway line. So the dog was tracking them. Yeah. And I'm pretty certain they were jumping. They were either trying to stay on the track itself or they were jumping from sleeper to sleeper, but they thought he was going to throw the dog off. It didn't. We got to a point and the track came off the railway line, down the embankment to the river.
Yeah. That's always a stereotype as well, that they can't track in rivers.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to give any secrets away, but your dogs can track through rivers. This dog went down the embankment to the river, straight over the river. Yeah. No, and dogs can do it. Trust me, they just can. We came out. By this time, we're pretty muddy, we're pretty wet, and I'm starting to feel the pressure a little bit. And it's daytime. That's the good thing. It's daytime, so I can see where I'm going. So you can go that little bit faster. We emerge into another field, and probably, I don't know, a third of a mile ahead of me, I just see a person disappear through a hedge. Don't know whether or not it's the offenders that I'm looking for, but a person disappears through the hedge. At which point the helicopter comes over.
Yeah.
And drowns out all the communications with the sound of the helicopter. But the dog now is really going.
And you're stuck at the other side of the river, or you?
No, I've gone through the river. Gone through the river. We're now into another field. I could start to cross this field, and this is also being cultivated. And what I didn't know was literally, whilst I was in the field, there was a farmer spraying herbicide as a pre-emergent, which means before the crops come out of the ground, treatment. Mm-hmm. And it was a bright orange spray. I knew that because I got covered in it. This dog tracked straight the way through. The farmer's coming down the field, the spray is drifting from the sprayer, and we tracked straight through the stream of spray.
Right.
Unbelievably, we emerge from it and we are both tainted with orange spray. The relevance of that comes later. But we come out. The farmer stops when he realises it's the police and not some lunatic just running across his field. Turns off the sprayer, but the damage was done by then. So we track through all the spray, we get into another field, and by this time we've lost sight of them. So we carry on tracking, and the helicopter's above, and they say they're not sure, but they think they've got a heat source ahead of us. So I'm pretty confident we're onto the right people. Eventually, a figure appears out of a hedge about a quarter of a mile ahead of me. And I guess it was a little bit optimistic on my part, but I shouted a warning at this person to stand still, which they clearly didn't. The relevance of that is that when the dog hears the warning challenge, they know they're going to be released.
Right.
So I unclip the dog. The dog's seen the person, and off he goes. By the time he's 400 yards is a lot of ground to make up. The person's disappeared.
Yeah.
He's obviously seen the helicopter. He's probably seen me, and the dog is inbound. And when I finally catch up with the dog, he has got somebody in the ditch. Now, this guy and the dog are in the bottom of a bramble-filled ditch. The guy had obviously decided to hide from the dog in the ditch. The dog's gone down there, and the two of them are fighting in the ditch, and the dog's winning.
Yeah, I wouldn't fancy your chances. No. Not a bramble bush either.
So the helicopter then tells me that there's 3 other people the other side of a pond, way out of my sight. I can't see the pond. So I jump in the ditch. I get hold of the guy, take the dog, control the dog. I put handcuffs on the guy and push him back in the ditch. Because I'm working on the basis that if you're handcuffed behind, you can't climb out of a ditch with your hands handcuffed behind. So I get the dog off, and this was probably to people who are not familiar with it, but one of the most exciting parts about it is that this dog was able to switch off from dealing with that person and pick up the track again of the other people.
Covered in fertilizer, which isn't. I was going to say it's quite smelly actually.
The dog was covered in this orange spray, and well, I'll tell you the relevance of it later on. But the dog sets off again. Now, probably a bad decision on my part, but I thought I'm going to just let the dog free track, and the helicopter can see it. Can't see where these people are now. They've hidden from the helicopter. The dog makes its way around this big wooded surrounded pond, and I can hear it barking, and then I hear a lot of shouting. Dogs can travel a lot quicker than I could. I've got to get through ditches, hedges, fences, finally get to the dog, who has now got another person, he's biting, and 2 other people are standing round him. Now, what I didn't know, and what transpired afterwards, that the first person he bit was not the guy who I then was being held by the dog. Whilst he bit the first person, the other 2 kicked and beat this dog.
Right.
To get it off.
Not always a good idea.
It wasn't a good idea because the dog took a big chunk out of the first guy, and I mean quite a big chunk of flesh out of him, before coming off and attacking one of the others that was attacking him, who he then had hold of when I got there by the leg. So by this time, the dog's had a long track. He's now had 2-3 bites on people, and he's had a real good kicking. Yeah.
Do they get armour? They have armour. The dogs have armour.
No,
nothing.
Nothing at all. The guys were absolutely exhausted, which was a benefit to me, but so was I. The good thing was the helicopter was able to talk in other officers, and by the time they got there, I'd got 3 guys lying on the ground. I had no handcuffs. I'd got me, the dog, and they weren't going anywhere.
Extra bit of thigh or whatever it was on the side.
The dog was, Cap had a good day. Anyhow, we other officers turned up. They were escorted away. We went back and retrieved the guy from the ditch, and my plan worked absolutely fine because he couldn't get out the ditch with his hands handcuffed behind him. So we got all 4 of them, and they were responsible for numerous burglaries and robberies all over the country. But what we were lacking was evidence to connect them with the vehicle.
Yeah.
And from my own experience, I knew it was really important. All right, there may well be forensic evidence that would be able to connect them afterwards, from fingerprints and DNA in the vehicle, and that would then connect them with the crime scene. But we needed whatever evidence we could get. So the dog was then, and I was then tasking the dog to go back along the whole track and find any discarded items. Because clearly, whilst they're running away, what they want to do is get rid of as much evidence that they've got of anything to do with the burglaries, anything to do with the car. And we found gloves, we found the car keys, the dog found them. And we even found credit cards that had been stolen in the burglaries that had been discarded as they were running away from the stolen vehicle. So it was really good. This happened on a very warm spring day, and just as I got back to the police car, and I don't mind admitting I was tired. The dog was tired. The dog just collapsed. Yeah, just fell over. Was unresponsive. His eyelids were flickering.
Oh, this sort of, I thought you meant as in go to sleep. No, as in
no.
There's something wrong here.
There's something wrong. And suddenly I was energized that this poor dog was in a bad way. And what transpired was that both of us inhaled what was quite toxic spray chemicals, which had caused respiratory problems with the dog, and it subsequently I had a similar sort of thing, but I didn't collapse from it. The dog was put into another police car, and rushed off to the vets, treated for heat exhaustion and given steroids for its respiratory system, and made a full recovery. And it was only then that I was then told that the dog had not only had a long track, 3 bites, which is physically very demanding on any dog, been sprayed with these noxious chemicals, but had also had a really bad kicking and beating from 2 people.
Nothing broken, anything there?
No, and it's amazing that dog took it and stuck with it. And for that, the dog and myself, we got a commendation from the chief constable for the performance of the dog. And even now, and I look back, and it still sends a tingle up my spine that the dog was able to do all those things, and still at the end of it go and look for some credit cards and a bunch of keys before finally collapsing.
Do they get awards and medals and stuff? Is that just the army? They do it in the police as well?
Yeah, no, they don't get medals in the police, but they do get awards in terms of commendation. So the dog got a commendation. So it was probably one of those things which, and I spoke to very experienced dog handlers after that, and they said, you will probably never get a job quite like that, where the dog gets to do all the aspects of what it was trained for in one episode, and under such extreme conditions of abuse by the people, chemical, tracking through that environment in itself was a phenomenal feat for the dog.
It's amazing how far behind we would be without dogs, to be honest, in this scenario. I mean, they add such a massive amount to the police force in this way.
Yeah, they do. And dogs, we've kind of started to over many years realise that they can do so many things for us. And I guess that's why I get the buzz out of dog training. Because nowadays, if it's a companion dog, you can teach them to do things which sometimes the owners are very surprised about, and for a lot of people, that their expectations of what their dogs can do use a minuscule amount of the capabilities of the dog, and even dogs which have got very little sort of working background, if you find what triggers them, and that's the secret for me as a dog trainer, what is it that motivates the dog, and what is it that I can use to get that dog to do things which I want it to do? That's all dog training really is. In the rural environment and in the countryside, we have lots of dogs that are still working, be they shepherding dogs, herding sheep and cattle.